All right, so the theme this week is car rental in New Zealand. So we're going to take a road trip together from the beautiful Nelson Lakes National Park all the way to Picton, and as we are going to be watching this amazing road trip, we're going to be discussing everything you need to know about car rental in New Zealand. We're going to be talking about tips for first timers in New Zealand. We're going to be talking about the different car rental companies that there are, their requirements.
What type of vehicle?
What
to
type of
rent.
vehicle? Comparing car rentals and camper van rentals and all this kind of good stuff. On top of that, if you guys are interested, guys and girls are interested in us covering our favorite car rental companies in New Zealand, because we tried dozens of them, please do let us know in the comment below. And if there is enough interest, especially if you're watching a replay of that and you put that in the comment of the video, then we will do a video about that. We're just not sure if you guys are interested in our opinion on which car rental companies to use in New Zealand. But with that in mind, let's begin and let's start talking to first timers, people that have never rented a car in New Zealand and what they should know. So Laura, how can we navigate car rental and camper van rental with these in New Zealand? And let's begin with understanding the different requirements.
Yeah, so first of all, you need to be the right age to rent a vehicle. With most rental companies, the minimum age for renting a vehicle is usually 21 years old. However, there are the occasional company that allows for 18-year-olds and up to drive, and there can sometimes be a surcharge for younger drivers with some companies. So younger drivers should do a little bit more research than, for instance, someone that is over 21 or 25 years old.
Indeed.
Also, you'll need a valid driving license. So if your driving license is not in English, then it will need to be accompanied by an official translation or an international driving permit. Make sure that it is a full valid license, not a provisional, not a learner's, for instance. Make sure that you are legal to drive a car.
All right. How about choosing the right vehicle? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so you will want to choose a vehicle depending on your trip style. So, for instance, if you are on a budget, you're concerned with, being fuel efficient, that sort of thing, then a smaller vehicle tends to be perfectly viable for a New Zealand road trip. Or, for instance, if you have, you're traveling as a large group, maybe you're a family, you might want something like an SUV. And then, of course, if you want that sort of camper van road trip experience, which is very different to, for instance, staying in hotels or even hostels, in accommodations, then camper vans offer an alternative experience. So
size matters when it comes down to choosing the right vehicle.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about insurance. I know it's a big topic for a lot of people.
Yeah, so for most car rental companies, a good thing to know for New Zealand is that a basic insurance, a standard insurance, is usually included in the rental price. So adding, usually when you're paying for an insurance option, you are paying a daily fee to reduce the excess that you would have to pay should something happen to your vehicle. So instead of maybe your vehicle rental company's policy is $3,000 you would have to pay because insurance is usually included, you can pay a daily fee to reduce that excess to say $1,000. So if something was to happen to your vehicle, you wouldn't have to pay as much, but you are still paying a daily fee. It's up to you whether you want to go for that or not.
All right. So something that a lot of first-time renters don't do is inspecting the vehicles.
Yeah, so it's very important when you pick up your vehicle to walk around with the car rental staff, and also point out as well, be active to show if there is any dents, anything that they might have missed themselves, because you want to make sure that there's nothing that the car rental company are going to say, oh, that's you must have caused that, so we're going to either take that from your credit card or your bond, or however that security deposit has been paid. And yeah, basically you just want to make sure that you are active in that process of inspecting the vehicle.
It's also a great time to actually familiarize yourself with the vehicle, understanding how it works. Changing from one car to the other actually may have a few kind of different settings and everything. So that's your time to actually even ask the person that's going to be showing you around the vehicle to actually ask a few questions if you're unfamiliar with a couple of things. All right. So next up, planning your route is extremely important when renting a vehicle in New Zealand. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
so in the broad scheme, it's good to start with an itinerary for New Zealand. We do have plenty of them on nzpocketguide.com. So knowing, are you going to do an itinerary of the North Island, the South Island, both? Making sure that you have adequate time to fit in what you need because the drive times can be pretty long in New Zealand. So that overall picture is really important to plan ahead. And then on the sort of smaller scheme, each day planning your route. So either using GPS or a mix of GPS and maps. As we often say on this channel, just solely relying on Google Maps isn't always the smartest option. Sometimes it can take you on not necessarily the safest route, but it will want to take you on the fastest route, which can take you down some very dodgy gravel roads. So
We strongly recommend you actually purchase the paid GPS app on your phone and not rely on Google Map. Purchase one of those TomTom Garmin's or whichever. We don't work for any of them, but purchase an actual map or GPS map of New Zealand on your phone. It'll cost you at most $5, but it is very, very good. And in broad scheme of things, it is really not that much money when you are spending money for a full a trip to New Zealand, and it can make a big difference. All right, so next up, let's be aware of additional costs. So there may be some hidden fees.
Yeah, so bear in mind that if you are picking up your vehicle in a different location to where you're dropping it off, you're likely to have to pay a one-way fee. There may be additional driver's fees. So if you want to share the responsibility of driving with someone else, then you may have to pay an extra daily fee for that. There may be even an extra fee if you are, a younger driver.
If you're under 25, there's always a tax.
Yes. So, like when you are reviewing your car rental payments, make sure that you look at all those extra fees. There could be ways to save money going with another company that might not charge those fees, for instance. So just always bear that in mind.
All right, and there are two road tolls in the whole country. Three road tolls in the whole country of New Zealand, which are only a handful of dollars. You probably won't encounter them during your trip to New Zealand. They're not the most scenic roads, but familiarize yourself with that if you want to. There's a full article on NZ Pocket Guide. Speaking of familiarizing yourself, how about familiarizing yourself with the local driving laws? It's slightly different. One that always catch me by surprise is the fact that it is illegal to park your car on the side of the road if the front of your car faces the opposite way of the traffic. And that's something that is very... my background is European, right? So it's something that is very common in all of Europe. You have cars parked on any side and any orientation, but that is illegal. So do keep that in mind. Anything else, Laura?
Obviously, driving on the left-hand side of the road is the way that the traffic moves in New Zealand. Keep an eye on speed limits. There's a lot of winding roads as well, so there are usually recommended speed limits for taking corners, which there are signs for too. We do have full articles on nzpocketguide.com familiarizing you with some of the road rules that might be different from your home country, and for instance how intersections work, who has right of way, roundabouts, all that good stuff. So do make sure that you really get that down before getting behind the wheel in New Zealand.
Speaking of being prepared, first-time renters for cars in New Zealand are always surprised as to the ever-changing and how quickly change when it comes down to the weather conditions.
So if you are traveling in more mountainous areas, particularly during the winter season, and particularly in the South Island, then you might want to be aware that sometimes roads can be closed. Sometimes you might want to hire snow chains if you're going to ski areas, that sort of thing. Also bear in mind that rain comes down quite hard, can change the visibility, so just adapting.
You have seen some of our videos where we've been doing the drive with like epic rain right here, like during one of our live show. It is quite epic.
Adapting to the conditions is really important. You'll want to slow down if roads are really wet or particularly icy, that sort of thing. So just knowing that it's not just always going to be bright sunshine.
It doesn't always look like that.
The weather changes a lot.
All right, and so speaking of the weather, so how do you prepare yourself in case of an emergency?
First of all, you want to make sure that you have, easy access to the number of your car rental company, or at least the roadside assistance that they give you. Almost all car rental companies, I can't think of any that don't, they all have roadside assistance included in the car rental. So make sure that you have the number of that available. Also, be aware of what the emergency number is in New Zealand if things go awry, which is 111 in New Zealand. Also, it might be a good idea to make sure that you have a bit of a safety kit in your vehicle. So, if something goes wrong, you get a flat tire, that sort of thing. Make sure that there is a kit available to deal with that.
Well, like usually there is, right? Just ask during the car tour where it is. Because that's usually the issue is like where it is, where is the spare wheel, all those kind of things. In every different vehicle, it's always in a different spot. It's really annoying.
Some car rental companies might include like first aid kits, that sort of thing. Or you can always bring your own. That's kind of what we tend to do, is we have our own sort of first aid kit. Just make sure that you have all those sort of necessary tools and equipment in your vehicle should anything go a little bit wrong.
All right, and finally, keep sustainability in mind, keep the environment in mind. So please basically keep your rubbish with you, don't toss things out of your windows, just all those kind of things. And also, if you can avoid like backtracking quite a lot, that will also save the planet, use a bit less gas. So
plan an efficient route. If you're getting out the car to take photos, switch your engine off, that sort of thing. Just keep all that in mind.
All right, so next up we'll talk about what you need to be able to hire a car in New Zealand. We'll go through that in depth. All right, let's continue with our coverage of car rentals in New Zealand, and let's talk about what you need to hire a car in New Zealand. So those are going to be kind of the basics, but there is a few details that you must know when it comes down to some of the documents you need. So first up, to rent a car in New Zealand, you obviously need a driver's license.
Yes, so you do need, as I was saying, a full valid driver's license. You can't rent a car usually on provisional licenses or learner's license. There may be the odd company, like the very odd company that allows New Zealand or Australian restricted licenses, but in general, make sure it is a full valid license of the driver. The person that is got their name down for hiring the vehicle. Second of all, you need to make sure that your license is written in English, and if it's not written in English, then you have your original driving license always accompanied with an approved translation or an international driving permit, otherwise known as the IDP. The IDP is usually the easiest option to go for because other countries accept that as an official translation for a driving license. So and different countries have different sort of processes for getting an IDP. It can sometimes take up to 3 weeks to process, so make sure that you do get that organized well in advance before your trip.
Indeed. Then you need to, which you will do with the driver license, need to prove the age of the driver, because that will incur certain restrictions as well.
Yes. So for hiring a vehicle in New Zealand, most companies have a limit age range of 21 years old, but there are certainly companies that will allow for 18 years old and up to hire vehicles, and we do have articles specifically about which recommended companies to take if you are a young driver. We have that listed on nzpocketguide.com. Also bear in mind that there can be surcharges for drivers that are under 25 years old.
Or mandatory insurances.
Or mandatory insurance, like you have to take the insurance options. So if you are under 25 years old, it's always best to do a little bit of extra research to see where you might have to pay a bit more. Maybe you can go with a company that doesn't have all those extra charges. There certainly are some. So do your research, and best to do your research on nzpocketguide.com.
There you go.
Yeah.
And finally, you do need a credit card.
Yes, so in order for the car rental company to take a sort of security deposit, they usually ask to have a credit card pre-authorization, or an imprint, it's sometimes called. So that authorizes that company to take a specific amount of an agreed amount of money
$1 million.
from your credit card should there be any damage to the vehicle or any other sort of fees that would break the car rental agreement that you sign.
It's often for like speed tickets and those kind of things.
Yeah, for tickets, or if you don't refuel the car when you take it back, that sort of thing. Usually, in general, like Visa and MasterCard is the most widely accepted type of credit card. Some car rental companies will accept debit cards as well, as long as they're Visa or MasterCards. And in the very rare instance, they may even take a cash deposit. We do have an article on nzpocketguide.com, which is how to hire a car or camper van in New Zealand without a credit card. So if you want to check that out, see which companies allow you to do that without a credit card, there are a limited few. We list them there.
It's called a handful.
Yes.
All right, next up we'll talk about budgeting for a road trip in New Zealand. All right, so let's continue with our theme today, and let's talk about planning for a budget for your car road trip in New Zealand. So taking a road trip in New Zealand is not really something you want to do too lightly. You will need to save up to be able to actually make the most of it. And there is a lot of different kind of costs to keep in mind. And so let's begin with car rental costs. So within the car rental cost, the car itself, the rental itself for the car can range from $30 a day for a small car in the low season to like $150 a day for the same car during the high season. If you want premium vehicles like EVs, four-wheel drive SUVs, etc., that'll be $70 a day during the low season, up to $200 a day during the high season. On top of that, you need to include all the other car rental fees, such as young drivers fees, one-way fees, extra drivers fees, and if you're one of those suckers that decide to rent a GPS for like $10 a day rather than literally downloading an app that costs you $5 for the whole trip, well, you may want to keep this cost in mind as well. Then on top of that, you also have the car rental insurance to keep in mind. So the insurance price will be, very different depending on the companies, right? That can be between 20 to sometimes 50 and more per day. And so one thing to keep in mind about insurance costs is that every time you rent a car in New Zealand, an insurance is already included within that rental price, right? But that insurance will have an excess, which is usually higher, which is $3,000, for example. And so if that happens, right, let's say you're having a chip on the windscreen or something like that, which most insurance actually don't even cover, so that's a bad example. But let's say you're breaking one of the tail lights, right? And let's say that costs $800. Your excess is $3,000. You are liable for the full $800, and that's pretty much it. Let's say you completely crash the car and the car has to be totaled, right? Well, then your fee will only be $3,000. You don't have to repay for the whole car. So sometimes it's worth kind of considering, is it worth it to actually go up in the insurance or not, depending on the length of your trip. Usually what happens is that the longer your trip is, the less worth it is to actually get the insurance. So keep that in mind. Obviously, we're not qualified insurance advisor, so do your own research, but consider that in mind. But usually there is a fee to reduce the excess to like something smaller, like 1,000 or 500, or all the way down to zero. The other thing to keep in mind is the cost of fuel. So we all know petrol is expensive, right? So in New Zealand at the moment, and things change all the time, it's about $2.50 per litre.
I checked, the average price this morning was $2.66.
Okay, $2.66.
But that changes obviously all the time, yeah.
All right, so let's say $2.50 per litre, right? So it's approximately $11.35 per gallon. If you are renting a diesel vehicle, which most cars will be petrol, it's usually more for the larger kind of vehicle that will be diesel. It's a little over $2 a litre at the moment, which is $9.10 per gallon. All of those prices, by the way, are New Zealand dollars. If you are renting a diesel car, though, you also have to pay RUC, which is a road user charge. That's around $76 to $82 per 1,000 kilometers, which is 621 miles in freedom units. And so that depends on the size of the vehicle, and then you'll have to kind of arrange that with basically the car rental companies and just discuss that with them. So usually you're better off going for petrol anyway. All right, on top of that, you need to remember that you will need to take the ferry if you're traveling between North Island and the South Island of New Zealand. That's kind of the only way to get your vehicle there. We are making slow progress in building that bridge, but it's going to take a while. There is one crazy guy with a few sticks. Anyway, taking the ferry with the vehicle will cost you around $175 to $255 per one-way trip and one passenger. So if you have other people in your vehicle, then you need to add to that. So yeah, keep that in mind. As we mentioned earlier in this video, there is only 3 toll roads around New Zealand. That's a few bucks. I don't think you're going to be using them, but there's one near Tauranga and 2 around Auckland. Is that
2 near Tauranga and 1 near Auckland.
That's the other one. Yeah, 2 near Tauranga and 1 near Auckland. Anyway, you probably won't be passing through them, and if you do, just to look at our article. And obviously there is all your road trip holiday costs, which is, your accommodation, your food, your snacks, your activities and all of that. So just keep those one in mind. I can't really give you a breakdown on that because that is a lot of it. But that should give you a good understanding about all the different kind of costs that incurs and just average prices, things to keep in mind when renting a car in New Zealand. We obviously have so much more information about costs and prices on NZ Pocket Guide. There's a link in the description of this video. Next up, we're going to be talking about choosing a rental vehicle, like the right kind of vehicle for your road trip. All right, so while you guys continue with plenty of questions and comments, let's continue with our theme of the week, and we're going to be talking about how to choose the right rental vehicle for yourselves. So there is a lot of different type of vehicle, from large to small. So let's talk about small to medium cars, Laura. Why would you choose a small to medium car? What's the budget on that?
Yeah, first, well, small to medium cars, I think the biggest advantage to them is the fact that they are best for if you are on a budget, if you do want to save some money, if you want something that's fuel efficient and reliable, because larger cars use more fuel. So having these small to medium cars tend to be just more fuel efficient models, and they're also perfectly adequate, even more adequate. They're perfectly great for New Zealand roads, as you can see from the video. As you can see from the video, like, mostly the roads in New Zealand are, well maintained, well, except for the odd pothole, but that's not really going to
the odd pothole,
It's not going to change too much whether you decide what sort of vehicle you're having. So yeah, contrary to popular belief, not all roads are gravel roads and dirt roads. Most of the roads you're going to be traveling on are exactly as you're seeing right now on screen, and that is perfect for small to medium cars. You don't need to be driving that massive truck that just went past. It's a bit much for what the vehicle, what New Zealand roads are. And, also, as Robert was saying in the chat earlier, he actually didn't like the fact that they upgraded him to a larger car. The smaller cars are great for the narrow, winding roads in New Zealand. They're easier to maneuver, easier to park. If you want to make it easy for yourself and, more cost effective, small to medium cars is the way to go.
When it comes down to budget, small cars go for about $30 per day at the low end in the low season to about $100 per day for high-end model in the high season. And when we're talking about small and medium cars, medium Corolla, Maxima, the small car like Guts and Swift are the kind of thing that we're talking about. And hey, if you want to kind of travel on the budgets with more than only a couple of people, something like an Estima is also kind of like small to medium and a good idea. All right, so let's move on to large cars, those SUVs and four-wheel drive. So as Laura was pointing out, we don't necessarily need a four-wheel drive or an SUV when traveling in New Zealand. You really don't. You will just do it for your own comfort and just to be able to spend more money on fuel, which is a great hobby of a lot of people. But aside from that, what is it perfect for, Laura?
Okay, so maybe you want to choose an SUV because perhaps you've got a large group that, I say a large group, I'm still talking about 4 to 5 people that want a lot of space, that maybe have a lot of luggage to carry around with them. SUVs provide that a little bit more extra room. Also, perhaps if you are traveling to areas that are a bit more off the beaten track, maybe you've got, you have to go over a bit of a bumpier gravel road to get to where you need to go. There's the odd gravel road that is perhaps more suitable for high clearance vehicles compared to low clearance vehicles, which tends to be the low clearance is more what small to medium vehicles are. For 4-wheel drive, if you are going in the backcountry, if you're going hunting, if you're going hiking on little known trails, somewhere that is not on most sort of tourists' radars, then usually those people know who they are and they'll know whether they need a 4-wheel drive or not. And maybe an extra thing to add for the SUVs is some of the smaller ski fields that have gravel roads to get up to access them. Maybe SUVs and 4-wheel drives are a little bit better for those roads. So that's they're better for very specific situations, but obviously the downside to them is that they do consume more fuel. They are more
petrol guzzlers for sure. Yeah.
They're more expensive just in their daily rates. So maybe Robin wants to just sort of give a range of what those daily rates would be.
All right. So when it comes down to renting 4-wheel drives or SUVs in New Zealand, that would be like starting at $70 per day in the low season for not the best SUV or anything like that. And then, it goes up to, usually about 200 or more per day during the high season. The type of model you'll find in New Zealand are usually Pathfinders, RAV4 or Tucsons. But as Laura was saying, we do fail to see the value for money, to actually hire one of those large vehicles when traveling around New Zealand. We're looking at the huge amount of money that you also need to actually run it. Because as you see on the videos right now, this is the main highway on the southern end of New Zealand. And that is still quite windy. So you will find that you actually expend a lot of petrol. And despite the fact that we professionally travel around New Zealand all the time, we still go with small cars.
Yeah.
But let's move on to the last vehicle type we're going to be talking about today, and that's electric vehicles. So what is it good for?
Yeah, so obviously the main benefit of electric vehicles is the lack of having to buy fuel. Although some petrol stations, they will charge you to charge EVs, that price is a lot smaller than the fuel costs at the moment. So in terms of saving that sort of money for fuel on the go is obviously the main benefit there. It's obviously if you are environmentally conscious and you want to have less of a carbon footprint on your trip, then that is a good way to go, knowing that most car rental companies will always bring in new vehicles anyway. If you were getting really deep into it, you're getting a new vehicle EV or a new vehicle petrol either way. So just looking at that sort of carbon cost of creating the vehicle itself, usually EVs with car rental companies is the more sustainable option. So if that is something that matters to you, then EVs definitely benefit on that side of things. And EVs come in lots of different sort of styles. That you will sort of find that small car or small to medium car that we sort of recommend for traveling New Zealand, and they will have a smaller price than if you can also go luxury and get a Tesla or whatever, and that will be quite an expensive daily rate. EVs, they're not the cheapest daily rates, but they can end up being quite economical for road trips around New Zealand if you go for sort of the smaller, cheaper models. Also, just to bear in mind though, for renting an EV is that you do tend to need to plan where you're going to charge. So petrol stations in New Zealand, they're all over the place pretty much, unless there are signs saying there's no petrol station for the next 160 kilometers or whatever.
Signs in New Zealand have a very high-pitched voice. Yeah. Interesting.
So, but in general, you do need to, EV stations are very, there's quite a lot of them in New Zealand, but I think it's still at that stage where you do need to get an app to be okay, where's the next one, or can I charge it at the next campground I'm staying at or the next motel I'm staying at, because a lot of motels and stuff have EV chargers. So just a little bit more planning is needed, but really not that much.
All right, when it comes down to budget, again, small EV, $70 per day in the low season, or you can get a Tesla for $195 per day. And then during the high season, like midsummer, it's between 150 to 250. All right, so let's continue talking about car rental in New Zealand and talking about choosing the right company for yourself. So, as a general rule of thumb, choosing the right company for yourself to do your road trip in New Zealand is a very personal choice. Every company has its pros and its cons. Otherwise, well, they run out of business, and that's pretty much it, right? So they all have good selling points for themselves. One of the things, though, to keep in mind is that to check the company is legitimate. Usually, a good way to do that is to go on our website. We talk about most legitimate car rental companies on the website, and so if we mention it, that means that we know that they are legit and they'll be a good fit for you. And no joke, we talk about all of them. Should they pay us or not? Right? So yeah, just keeping that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is maybe just going with the car rental companies that you have a point system with, like the Avis, the Hertz, the Budget, all those kind of things which are kind of worldwide. Now, if you are interested in us actually giving our personal opinion, which we don't often do right here on this channel, do let us know in the comments. So far, we only have the great Mark D that has told us in the live chat that he was interested, as this video was recorded live. But if you're watching a replay, tell us in the comments. If we get enough comments, we'll do that video where we actually go over all of them. But yeah, there is plenty of car rental companies in New Zealand. There is even options for car relocations. We do have recommendations on nzpocketguide.com, and there is a link in the description of this video. Next up, we're going to be talking about something a bit more interesting, and that's the different seasonal consideration for car and camper van rentals in New Zealand. So tailoring your vehicle choice to New Zealand seasons and also the way you travel. So let's go season by season, and let's start with summer, which in New Zealand is from December to February. So the characteristic of summer is that we have warm temperature, long daylight hours, and it's the popular touristic seasons.
Yeah, so for vehicle considerations for this season, you might want to choose a vehicle with air conditioning. You will want to book your vehicle as far in advance as possible for this season, because a lot of people want to do the same thing as you, and that means that your sort of first choice of vehicles, you know, the ones that have the best deals, tend to go first. So do advance booking to avoid disappointment. And also be prepared for busy roads. So a few driving tips, especially to those tourist attractions like Milford Sound, you'll have to be extra on guard for driving on those roads where there's going to be a lot of traffic. And yeah, also just simple things like make sure you're staying hydrated. If it's really hot, make sure that you are drinking plenty of water as you're traveling.
I can't stress enough that driving with the window open and your arm outside, you will burn that arm. It happens to me every summer. Keep that in mind. All right, next season we're going to be talking about autumn. So autumn in New Zealand runs from March to May, and it usually presents with cooler temperatures, spectacular autumn foliage, and also fewer tourists.
So for choosing your vehicle, make sure that because the weather is quite fluctuating, different cooler temperatures could be, cool or warm or whatever, make sure that your vehicle has various heating options. Also applies to camper van rentals if you want to make sure that, your camper van can be heated if you're wanting to.
Yeah, there's a lot of camper cars, no heating whatsoever, and they get very cold.
All-wheel drive, perhaps if you are going to those sort of more mountainous areas where there is a possibility of snow, or if you're going to do some early skiing or something like that, then make sure that you have a vehicle adequate for that. But the good thing is that roads are generally less crowded during this time. Autumn doesn't really have any, crazy school holidays or anything too much. That's more happens in winter, so it tends to be a really good time for driving and avoiding sort of the busy roads, but also just watch out for hazards like fallen leaves from the autumn trees, which can be
very slippery, especially with the rain. Yeah. All right, so next up we have winter. So winter in New Zealand runs from June to August. It features very cold weather, snow in the Alpines area, especially in the south end of New Zealand, and it's ideal for the winter sports enthusiasts.
Yes. So more vehicle considerations need to be taken for people that are going to ski fields or going over mountainous areas where there is the possibility of ice and snow. So you may want to hire snow chains if you're going to ski fields. And yeah, if you're going to sort of those mountainous areas, you might want or going to backcountry areas, then it might make more sense to get a 4-wheel drive. Obviously heating's going to be, a major consideration for a car or camper van. And obviously for driving tips, allow for extra time on the road if you are having to, slow down the speed if it's a bit slippery or, or if it's raining quite a lot. Yeah.
All right, so next up we have spring, which is from September to November in New Zealand, which features mild weather, blooming landscape, and actually quieter travel periods. It's probably the quietest time in the whole year.
Yeah, you can have pretty much any type of vehicle for this type of weather, but you might want to make sure that it has good ventilation so that for the changing temperatures you can keep...
This is when the weather changes the most rapidly, in between kind of like a few hours here and there, so that's when you want to keep that in mind.
Yep, but always be prepared for spring showers, windy conditions. Windy conditions is more of a issue if you're in a camper van because you can feel the wind more on the steering as you're driving. So just, be more mindful of that and be more careful when those different weather conditions happen.
And to wrap up this section, I just want to point out that the daylight hours in New Zealand change significantly between summer and winter, so do keep that in mind, that this may affect your driving schedule, as some of the drives in New Zealand are absolutely stunning, as you can see right here, so you may want to drive during the daylight hours. Let's continue with our coverage. So what happens when you are booking and picking up your car rental? So it's a very smooth and pretty standard process. So I'm going to go over it really quickly. But yeah, so when you're going to book your car rental in New Zealand online, you either have to pay in full, which always have a credit card fee, there, or you will only pay a deposit to secure your booking, and then you pay the remaining when you pick up your vehicle. Now, keep in mind that most of the time that deposit that you pay is non-refundable. So either way, once you've booked your vehicle online, before picking up your vehicle, you'll have to pay the bill, right? So it has to be paid in full before you start driving. That's kind of like the classic things that happen in New Zealand. We also suggest very strongly for you to not go too crazy on all the options and add-ons. They're very often overpriced. I already made a joke about GPS at $5 or $10 a day. It adds up, right? So there is always a lot of different options. And also, you'll be able to make those decisions when you pick up your car. So even if you booked a car with a certain amount of options and you want to add some to your rental, when you're about to pick up the vehicle, they'll always be happy to upsell you to something else, right? So do keep that in mind. You don't necessarily have to go with like all the add-ons. It's actually usually better to go with the thing with no add-ons and then just add them later if you feel like you want to do it. Now on pickup, we already talked about that during our tips for first timer. We strongly suggest you to do a full inspection of the vehicle. You know that sheet with a little diagram of the vehicle where you can write things down. Make sure that you write as much as possible and make sure that you take a photo of that paperwork as well before you leave it to the car rental companies. Yeah. So make sure that you do keep that in mind and you do it very, 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 very thoroughly, because it's highly likely that you will have to hand over your credit card details before you drive off with the car. So they will keep your credit card details and they will do a pre-authorization, which will allow the car rental company to charge you for that security bond or for that damage that you will have done. So do keep that in mind. And then, during this inspection, we also strongly advise you to ask as many questions about driving the vehicle or about fueling that vehicle or about, where is the first aid kit, where is the spare wheels and all that, about the vehicle itself. Ask, because, then after that, it's much harder to get all those question answers when you are on the roads. All right. All right, so to wrap up this video about car rentals in New Zealand, we're going to go through a very quick frequently asked questions to try to kind of cover as much ground as possible. But again, if you do have questions of your own, put them in the comments, give us some ideas for some videos, and we'll be very happy to answer them for you. Okay, so frequently asked questions. Laura, what documents do you need to rent a vehicle in New Zealand?
Driving license, credit card, and English translation or an international driving permit if your license is not English.
Can they rent a vehicle with a learner's license or provisional license?
No, not really.
What's the minimum age for renting a vehicle in New Zealand?
Usually it's 21 years old. However, there are some companies that will hire to 18 plus.
Do they need a special insurance to rent a camper van over a car?
No special insurance. It's very much the same deal, same sort of types of insurance policies for cars and camper vans.
Is there any restrictions of where you can drive your car when you rent a car in New Zealand?
There will be the odd named road that you cannot drive down. Some car rental companies even say you cannot drive this, you are breaching the policy if you go on a gravel road. So that varies from company to company, so just check that with the company.
Is it easy to find campgrounds or places to park for a camper van overnight?
It's pretty easy. So there are various choices for if you are whether you're camping in a camper van or even just a car. There are campsites, there are holiday parks. If you have a self-contained camper van, then you have more options for camping overnight. So there's lots of options. We do cover all that on nzpocketguide.com.
Can I drive from the North Island to the South Island with a car rental in New Zealand?
Usually, yes. There is the very rare car rental company that doesn't allow you to travel on the ferry, and instead they may have a car rental for you to pick up on the other island. So, but in most cases, you can take rental cars on the ferry.
Are the roads in New Zealand suitable for all type of vehicles?
Most roads are, yes.
What should I do if I have an accident or if I break down?
Your car rental company should have provided you with the details of a roadside assistance. If you're in an emergency, call the emergency number, which is 111.
111. Are the fuel costs high in New Zealand?
Yes.
Can I rent a vehicle for a one-way trip?
You can, just bear in mind that there is likely to be a one-way fee with that.
What's the average cost of renting a car rental in New Zealand?
At the very cheapest, you're likely to find a car for, say, $30 per day. That can go up to about $90 per day if you're looking at sort of the average cost.
Do I need to return the rental vehicle with a full tank of fuel?
Usually, yes. It depends on the car rental company, but most of them have a policy where you return it with the full gas.
Is it easy to cancel or modify the rental reservations?
Yes, it usually is. If they've taken a deposit and you want to cancel your car, then they'll take the deposit. But otherwise, then the rest is easy.
So are there any specific driving tips you want to share for the unique New Zealand driving conditions?
Mostly for the changing weather. You may have to slow down when it inevitably rains, when those sort of conditions happen where it's low visibility. We have covered a lot of that in this video.
Yeah, and we also have a lot of videos about that subject, so check them out. And last question, is it more economical to rent a car or a camper van in New Zealand?
Oh, that's the big question. We have covered this extensively on our channel.
I think we should update it for 2024
yeah,
one day.
Normally we would say that actually renting a budget car and staying in budget accommodations like hostels and campgrounds, holiday parks, that is usually more economical than renting a camper van.
All right, so that wraps up this video about renting a car in New Zealand. We've got plenty of information on nzpocketguide.com, so check the links that I have for you in the description of this video. Join us on Patreon if you want us to help you plan your trip in New Zealand in a much more personal way. It's super cheap, and hit all the buttons that YouTube wants you to hit in order to support our channel. Enjoy your time in New Zealand, and we'll see you in the next video.
See ya.